1 month ago, Trump openly threatened to take Greenland by force. Today, Greenland has signed a defense pact with Canada, and the United States was not even present. This happened at the Munich Security Conference, while Trump was still dealing with the political backlash from his annexation threats. Canada's defense minister walked into a signing ceremony alongside Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. The agreement included joint Arctic surveillance, coordinated military planning, and intelligence sharing. For governments signed, and the United States was not invited. This is not just another defense memorandum. This is Trump losing influence over the Arctic in real time. And it happened because his aggressive rhetoric pushed Greenland straight toward Canada. The deal was signed on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference, the same gathering where European leaders spent days debating how to respond to American unpredictability. 4 defense ministers stood together: Canada, Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands, for signatures. One message: the Arctic is secure, and they intend to keep it that way. The Memorandum of Understanding covers defense innovation, industrial cooperation, mutual logistic support, training programs, joint exercises, and military education. It formalizes intelligence sharing between Canada and Denmark focused specifically on Arctic monitoring. It creates a structured framework for joint operations in the High North. And most importantly, it officially recognizes Greenland and the Faroe Islands as full partners, not as side participants. The timing is everything. Throughout January, Trump escalated his threats about Greenland. He repeatedly called Greenland an absolute necessity. He refused to rule out the use of military force. He claimed the United States needed Greenland for national security. Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, responded bluntly. She warned that any attempt to use force would destroy the NATO alliance. Then, just 1 month later, Canada and Denmark moved forward with this agreement, not as a reaction to Trump, but as a strategic signal, a signal that Arctic security will be managed by Arctic nations, not by Washington issuing demands from thousands of miles away. Canada also opened a consulate in Nuuk, Greenland's capital, this week. That consulate had been planned before Trump returned to office, but now it carries far greater meaning. It has become a symbol. Canada is investing in Greenland, expanding its diplomatic presence, and strengthening long-term ties. While Trump talks about annexation, Canada offers partnership. But this story is about more than one defense agreement. It is about something Trump wants desperately to control, and he just lost it completely. Let me explain why. Greenland is not just a remote island. It is one of the most strategically valuable territories on Earth. It is the key to Arctic dominance, and whoever dominates the Arctic controls the future of global shipping, resource extraction, and military positioning in the 21st century. Start with geography. Greenland sits between North America and Europe. It controls access to the Northwest Passage, the Arctic shipping corridor that climate change is making navigable for the first time in modern history. Ships that travel through the Northwest Passage can cut roughly 7 days off the journey between Asia and Europe, compared to routes through the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal. That translates into billions of dollars in global shipping savings. And Greenland sits directly at the gateway. Then there are the resources. Greenland contains massive deposits of rare earth minerals: lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements critical for batteries, electronics, semiconductors, and advanced military technology. China currently controls around 60% of global rare earth production. The United States needs alternatives, and Greenland is one of the few locations on the planet with reserves large enough to truly matter. There are also oil and gas reserves offshore. Most are not economically viable yet. But as Arctic ice continues melting and extraction technology improves, Greenland's waters could become a major future energy zone. Whoever has influence over Greenland gains first access to those resources. Military positioning is the final major factor. Greenland hosts Thule Air Base, one of the most important US military installations in the world. It supports early warning radar systems, missile detection networks, and space tracking operations. It monitors Russian and Chinese activity in the Arctic. The base was built in 1951 under an agreement between the United States and Denmark. That agreement still exists today, but Trump wants more. He wants ownership. He wants full control. He wants a permanent American presence that does not depend on Danish approval. Meanwhile, Russia and China are rapidly expanding their Arctic operations. Russia has reopened Soviet-era military bases along its Arctic coastline. China has declared itself a near-Arctic nation and is investing heavily in Arctic shipping routes, research missions, and resource development. The competition for Arctic dominance is intensifying, and Greenland sits at the center of that competition. Trump understands this. That is why he tried to buy Greenland in 2019. Denmark rejected the offer. That is why Trump has now revived annexation rhetoric. He sees Greenland as essential to American strategic interests, and he sees Denmark as an obstacle. What Trump did not anticipate is that threatening Denmark would push Greenland toward Canada instead. With Greenland's strategic value, you would assume the United States would be working to secure its influence carefully. Instead, Trump's threats achieved the opposite. They pushed Greenland away, and now the consequences are becoming visible. Trump made 3 major strategic mistakes, and each one accelerated this shift. Mistake number 1 was treating Greenland like property instead of a self-governing territory with its own political leadership. Trump spoke as if Greenland could simply be taken. He talked about buying it, he talked about annexation, he even referenced military force. But he never treated Greenland's government as an equal partner. Greenland has home rule. It controls its domestic affairs. Denmark still manages defense and foreign policy, but Greenland has significant autonomy. Greenland's population is roughly 56,000 people, mostly Inuit. They have their own parliament, they have their own prime minister, and they have their own vision of sovereignty. So when Trump implied the United States could simply acquire Greenland, Greenland's leaders responded clearly. Greenland is not for sale. Greenland will decide its own future, and that future does not involve becoming American territory. Mistake number 2 was publicly threatening military force against a NATO ally. Trump refused to rule out force. That statement sent shockwaves through Europe. Denmark is a founding NATO member. An attack on Denmark would trigger NATO's Article 5. That means an attack on Denmark is an attack on every NATO member. Trump's comments forced European leaders to ask a question they never wanted to ask. Is the United States still committed to NATO at all? Denmark's prime minister made it clear that any use of force would end the alliance. French President Emmanuel Macron used the Munich Security Conference to argue that Europe must be able to defend itself independently. The political consequences of Trump's threats are still spreading. European governments are now openly discussing what security looks like in a world where America may no longer be reliable. Mistake number 3 was ignoring Canada completely. Greenland and Canada share a maritime border stretching over 3,000 kilometers. The Inuit populations of Greenland and northern Canada share deep cultural and historical ties. Canada has Arctic expertise, northern infrastructure, military capability, and long-established relationships across the region. If the United States wanted to strengthen its position in Greenland, working closely with Canada would have been the obvious strategy. Instead, Trump focused entirely on Denmark and Greenland. He ignored Ottawa, and that gave Mark Carney an opening. The timeline tells the story. January 7th, Trump calls Greenland an absolute necessity. January 20th, Trump refuses to rule out military force. February 14th, Canada and Denmark sign a defense pact that explicitly includes Greenland, and the United States has no role at all. No American input, no American influence, no seat at the table. Trump wanted control. Instead, he got exclusion. The agreement Canada signed creates a new framework for Arctic cooperation where American participation becomes optional, not essential. While Trump was issuing threats, Carney was already building partnerships, and what Carney signed changes the entire strategic picture. The cooperative spirit between Canada and Denmark has now expanded into formal defense coordination. The memorandum signed in Munich formalizes what Canada and Denmark have quietly been doing for years, sharing intelligence on ship movements through Arctic waters, coordinating search and rescue missions, running joint exercises in extreme cold, training personnel for Arctic operations. But it also introduces new structures. Defense innovation cooperation means Canadian and Danish companies can collaborate on Arctic military technology. Mutual logistics support means Canadian forces can use Danish facilities in Greenland, and Denmark can use Canadian Arctic bases. Personnel exchanges allow officers to train together and build long-term operational trust. That trust matters, because joint operations in the Arctic require seamless coordination. Arctic security is not theoretical anymore. Russian activity in the region is increasing. Chinese research vessels and icebreakers are now operating in areas they never accessed before. Climate change is opening new shipping routes. It is also making resource extraction possible in regions that were previously inaccessible. The Arctic is becoming contested territory, and Canada is building the partnerships it needs to protect its interests without relying entirely on the United States. This pattern is visible across multiple sectors. Canada signed the Security Action for Europe Defense Procurement Agreement, gaining access to European weapons development and manufacturing. Canada can now pursue submarine programs with France and Germany instead of relying on American systems. Canada has expanded trade relationships with China, reducing dependence on US markets. Canada is also building the Gordie Howe Bridge, breaking long-standing control over Detroit-Windsor trade routes. Every move follows the same strategy. Build alternatives, create options. Make American cooperation valuable, but never essential. The Denmark Defense Pact fits perfectly into that strategy. Greenland benefits from this as well. The agreement gives Greenland direct access to Canadian Arctic expertise without needing Washington as an intermediary. If Greenland wants to strengthen its Coast Guard capabilities, Canada can assist. If Greenland needs better search and rescue infrastructure, Canada has years of experience operating in similar environments. If Greenland wants more control over its territory, partnership with Canada provides a path that does not force Greenland to choose between Denmark and the United States. The Inuit connection reinforces this partnership. Greenland's population is approximately 88% Inuit. Northern Canada also has large Inuit communities. Those cultural connections create trust, and trust makes cooperation easier. Canada opening a consulate in Nuuk is another major signal. The consulate will include a defense attachment. That attach will work directly with Greenland's government on security issues, not through Copenhagen and not through Washington. That is a major shift in Arctic diplomacy, and it happened because Trump's threats made Greenland more open to alternatives. Now the next phase begins. Because this agreement is not the end of the story, it is the beginning. This does not mean NATO is collapsing, but it does mean NATO is becoming less dependent on the United States for Arctic operations. If Trump decides to pull back American commitments in Europe, Canada and Denmark now have a structure in place to maintain Arctic security without the US. That capability did not exist before. Now it does. Second, Greenland is moving toward greater autonomy, not full independence overnight, but more authority over its own affairs. This defense pact gives Greenland direct input into security decisions affecting Greenlandic territory. That is new. Previously, Denmark made most security decisions with American input. Now Greenland has a formal seat at the table, and it is backed by an international agreement. As Greenland gains autonomy, the US relationship becomes more complicated. Thule Air Base still operates under the 1951 agreement between Denmark and the United States, but if Greenland ever becomes independent, that agreement would need to be renegotiated, and Washington would be negotiating with a Greenlandic government that just signed a defense pact with Canada. After being threatened with annexation by Trump, that negotiation would not favor the United States. Third, Russia and China are watching closely. Both are attempting to expand their Arctic presence. Both face resistance from NATO members. The Canada-Denmark Pact shows Arctic nations coordinating to defend their interests. That makes Russian and Chinese expansion harder, but it also shows that coordination is happening without American leadership. If the United States is seen as unreliable, Russia and China may calculate that European and Canadian resolve is weaker without US backing. Whether that is true or not, the fact that they are even considering it shows how much has shifted. For 70 years, American dominance in the Arctic was assumed. Now it is being challenged. Fourth, the pact creates momentum for additional partnerships. Canada and Denmark signed this deal in Munich, the same conference where Canada finalized deeper entry into European defense procurement programs. The same conference where European leaders openly discussed building military capabilities that do not depend on the United States. The same conference where transatlantic relations were described as being under historic strain. Canada is not abandoning the United States. Canada is building relationships that prevent Canadian security from being dependent on any single country. And this Denmark Pact is a perfect example. If the United States remains reliable, the agreement strengthens NATO. If the United States becomes unpredictable, the agreement becomes Canada's alternative. This brings us back to the beginning. Trump wanted Greenland. He threatened annexation. He refused to rule out military force. And instead of gaining control, he pushed Greenland directly into a defense partnership with Canada that excludes the United States completely. This is what happens when threats replace diplomacy. Trump viewed Greenland as something America could take. Carney viewed Greenland as a partner Canada could build with. Trump demanded, Carney cooperated. Trump threatened force. Canada offered stability. The outcome is exactly what Trump did not want. An Arctic security framework led by Canada and Denmark. Greenland with more autonomy and more options. Europe building defense capabilities that can function without American leadership. And the United States watching from the outside. The Canada-Denmark Defense Pact is not the largest agreement signed this year. It is not the most expensive. It does not involve the most troops or the most equipment. But it is the clearest example of how Trump's strategy is backfiring. Every threat pushes Canada to build alternatives. Every demand accelerates partnerships that reduce dependence on Washington. Every attempt to impose American control produces the opposite result. More independence, more autonomy, more cooperation between countries that are not the United States. Trump wanted Greenland, instead he got isolation. One pact, 1 month. A complete Arctic shift. Canada and Denmark inside. America locked out. The pattern is now impossible to ignore. If you want more analysis on how global power is shifting, subscribe and stay informed. Because this is only the beginning.